the city that burns from within. There is a town in Pennsylvania where the ground is always warm. Not warm like sunlight on pavement, warm like something alive underneath is breathing. The asphalt on Route 61 has been cracking open for decades, not from frost, not from traffic, from heat. White sulfur steam rises from the fissures at 3 in the morning when the rest of Pennsylvania is frozen solid. If you press your hand flat against the earth here, you will feel it. A slow, deep pulse, like a heartbeat that doesn't belong to anything you want to meet. Centralia, Pennsylvania, population 5. The post office was canceled. The zip code was erased. The state condemned every building and demolished most of them. On Google Maps, the streets are still there, labeled, numbered, going nowhere. Ghost roads through empty fields that smell like the inside of a chimney. The fire under this town has been burning since 1962. It will still be burning in 2262. The geologists are not guessing. They did the math. And the most enraging part of this story, the part that will stay with you long after this video ends, is that it didn't have to happen. There was a moment, a specific Tuesday morning in May, a decision that took less time to make than it takes to drink a cup of coffee. And the men who made it knew exactly what they were choosing. We're going to go back to that morning, but first, you need to understand what was actually underneath this town. Because what they abandoned wasn't just houses and churches, it was something that should never have existed above ground in the first place. Centralia sat on the single richest vein of anthracite coal on the continent. Not just rich, obscenely, geologically, almost offensively rich. Anthracite is the purest form of coal that exists. Harder than stone, cleaner than oil, burning hotter than almost anything else you can dig out of the earth. For 100 years, the men of Centralia went underground every morning and carved out a labyrinth beneath their own streets. Tunnel after tunnel, chamber after chamber, stacked 10 stories deep. If you could have seen it from above, the whole structure would have looked like a skyscraper built in reverse. A massive, hollow architecture of black rock and empty air directly beneath the foundations of every house in town. By 1962, nobody thought about it anymore. The mines were closed, the tunnels were sealed. Out of sight, out of mind. The way Americans have always handled things buried underground. 2,000 people lived above that void. 7 churches, 5 hotels, a high school football stadium that packed out every Friday night. The kind of town where people left their doors unlocked and the diner knew your order before you sat down. From the outside, Centralia looked exactly like the American dream was supposed to look. They were sitting on 25 million tons of the most combustible material on Earth. And they were about to hand a lit match to 5 volunteers who had no idea what was underneath them. It was late May, 1962. Memorial Day was 4 days away, and the town council wanted the landfill cleaned up before the holiday. Nothing unusual. This was standard small-town procedure. Burn the accumulated trash, douse the ash, done in an afternoon. They hired 5 volunteer firemen. The cost was a few dollars for their time and a can of fuel. The landfill sat in an abandoned strip mine pit at the edge of town. Nobody checked the bottom of the pit. There was a hole. Not dramatic, not obvious. The kind of gap in old rock that you'd step over without breaking stride. But that hole connected directly into the Buck Mountain coal vein, into the tunnels, into the dark, into 25 million tons of fuel that had been sitting in perfect airless stillness for 30 years, waiting with the patience of geology for exactly this kind of accident. The volunteers lit the trash at 8 in the morning. By noon, the fire looked contained. By evening, they doused it and went home. The fire didn't go out. It went down. It found the hole. It slipped into the tunnels. And in there, away from water hoses, away from oxygen crews, away from every tool that could have killed it in an afternoon, it found a runway. It spread through the vein the way fire always moves when nobody is watching. Slowly, silently, and with complete indifference to what was built above it. Within days, the smoke started rising from unexpected places. Not from the pit, from cracks in the ground 50 yards away. Then 100 yards. The fire wasn't burning in one place anymore. It was traveling. Experts arrived within the week. The message they delivered to the town council was not complicated. Excavate now. Remove the burning material. Seal the vein. Cost to stop it completely at that moment? Less than a new fire truck. Somewhere between $8,000 and $10,000. The council looked at the number. They looked at their budget. And they decided to wait. Maybe the rain would handle it. Maybe it would burn itself out. They wrote that down in the meeting minutes. It is still there in the Schuylkill County archives if you want to go read it. The first warning sign wasn't smoke or flame. It was the snow. In the winter of 1963, residents near the edge of town noticed that the snow on their lawns wasn't sticking the way it should. It would fall and then slowly, quietly disappear. Not melting in sunlight, but absorbed by ground that was warmer than it had any right to be in a Pennsylvania January. Then the smell arrived. Sulfur and carbon monoxide seeping up through basement floors, through garden soil, through the gaps around pipe fittings and kitchen walls. Low grade, easy to dismiss. People blamed the old coal furnaces, the lingering damp of winter, the particular way old houses breathe. Then the headaches started. Every morning, dull and persistent, the kind that sit behind your eyes and don't respond to aspirin. Families started opening windows in February. Dogs refused to enter certain rooms. One family's canary, kept in the kitchen the way miners' families always kept canaries, the old habit of using small living things as poison detectors, died on a Tuesday morning with no prior sign of illness. Nobody connected it yet. The fire was no longer under the fields at the edge of town. It had traveled. It was now directly under the residential streets, under the foundations, under the floors where children were sleeping. And in Washington, in a federal office building with good ventilation and no sulfur smell, someone had already received a memo explaining exactly what was happening beneath Centralia. The estimated cost to stop it had risen, but it was still a number with a solution attached. They filed it. The fire kept moving. By the late 1970s, the wait-and-see strategy had a body count. Not a dramatic one, no explosions, no walls of flame visible from the highway. That was the problem. Centralia wasn't dying the way fires are supposed to kill things. Fast, loud, visible. It was dying the way carbon monoxide kills. Quietly. While you're asleep. While your kids are doing homework at the kitchen table 10 feet away. Carbon monoxide has no smell, no color, no taste. It doesn't announce itself. It simply begins replacing the oxygen in the air, molecule by molecule, until the math stops working in your favor. Residents started finding their dogs dead in the yard with no visible cause. Houseplants that had survived Pennsylvania winters for decades suddenly dropped in a week. One family's basement registered CO levels that, according to the fire department's own instruments, should have killed everyone inside the house within 4 hours of going to sleep. The family had been living in that house for 3 years. This is the part of the Centralia story that doesn't make it into the short version. It wasn't just fire under the ground. The fire was cooking the earth itself, burning through the old coal chambers, collapsing the tunnels, turning solid ground into a slow-motion sinkhole that covered 4 square miles and was getting larger every season. The technical term the geologists used was subsidence. What it looked like from street level was that Centralia was being digested. The town wasn't burning down. It was being consumed from underneath, the way a body is consumed, slowly, completely, and without leaving much behind. The snow still wouldn't stick in winter. The temperature of the soil in certain backyards registered higher than the air temperature in July. Blue flames, actual visible flames from burning methane, flickered out of the ground along the edge of town at night, seen by dozens of residents who reported them to the borough council and were told each time that the situation was being monitored. By 1980, the fire had moved under the residential streets, under the foundations, under the floors where people were sleeping. Valentine's Day, 1981. Todd Domboski was 12 years old. It was a Saturday afternoon in February, cold and gray the way Pennsylvania Februaries always are, and he was in the backyard of his family's house on Locust Avenue doing what 12-year-olds do. Nothing in particular, killing time, poking around the yard. He noticed a thin wisp of steam rising from the ground near the base of a tree. This was not unusual in Centralia anymore. Steam came up from the ground sometimes. Everyone had seen it. It was one of those things that had been happening long enough that people had stopped asking why. Todd walked over to look. The ground opened, not with a sound, not with a warning crack or a groan of shifting earth. One moment there was solid ground under his sneakers, and the next moment there was nothing. Just a hole 4 feet wide dropping straight down into the dark. Todd went in up to his armpits before his arms caught the edge. He was looking down into a shaft that dropped 150 feet into the burning coal seam below. The air coming up from that hole was visible, a thick, hot column of carbon monoxide and steam that smelled like the inside of a furnace. The walls of the hole were warm to the touch. The roots of the tree he was clinging to were already beginning to blacken. His cousin Jimmy was in the yard. He heard Todd shout, ran over and grabbed him, pulling him up and back onto solid ground in a matter of seconds. When fire crews arrived and lowered a temperature probe into the hole, the reading at the bottom was 784 degrees Fahrenheit. The human body begins to sustain fatal burns at 118 degrees. If Todd had fallen, if Jimmy had been inside the house, if he'd been 10 seconds slower, if the root had given way before the grip did, there would have been nothing to recover. The coroner's report would have listed the cause of death as a hole in the ground in a town that the government had been watching burn for 19 years. Todd Domboski was 12 years old. He survived because he had fast hands and a cousin who was paying attention. That is the entire margin. The photograph of that hole ran in newspapers across the country the following week. For the first time, Centralia was not a local story about a strange, ongoing problem in a small Pennsylvania coal town. It was a national story about a child who had nearly fallen into the earth on Valentine's Day because the United States government had decided in 1962 that $8,000 was too much to spend. Congress allocated funds. A federal study was commissioned. Officials arrived in Centralia with clipboards and expressions of grave concern. Here is what they concluded, after months of analysis and thousands of dollars in consulting fees, that extinguishing the fire was no longer technically feasible, that the only solution was relocation, that the 1,000 remaining residents of Centralia should be bought out, moved out, and the town should be quietly allowed to cease to exist. They did not say, "We had 19 years to stop this and chose not to." They did not say, "The men who made those decisions are still alive, still collecting pensions, and will face no consequences of any kind." They said, "The situation has evolved beyond remediation." The situation had evolved. Most residents took the buyout. When the federal government offers to purchase your home in a town where the ground is literally trying to kill you, the math is not complicated. But not everyone left. A core of residents, older ones mostly, people who had been born in Centralia, whose parents had been born in Centralia, whose grandparents had come from Eastern Europe with nothing and built something here with their hands. They looked at the government's offer and they looked at their houses and they said no. They understood something that the officials with clipboards did not. The fire could take their town. The government could erase their zip code. The state could condemn their properties and demolish their neighbors' houses one by one until their street was the last one standing. But the one thing neither the fire nor the government could do was make them leave. And in Centralia, that distinction mattered more than anything else. John Lakaitis was 71 years old when the last of his neighbors left. He stood on his porch on a Tuesday morning in 1993 and watched the state contractor's bulldozer take down the house across the street. It took 11 minutes, 40 years of someone's life. The porch where they drank coffee, the kitchen where their kids grew up, the bedroom where someone probably died, Gone in 11 minutes, pushed into a pile of lumber and insulation and loaded onto a truck. John went back inside, made breakfast. The floorboards under the kitchen table were warm, the way they'd been warm for 15 years now. He'd stopped noticing it the same way you stop noticing the sound of traffic if you live near a highway long enough. He wasn't leaving. He'd been born in Centralia. His father had been born in Centralia. His grandfather had come from Lithuania with $12 and a name nobody in Pennsylvania could pronounce, and had spent 30 years underground cutting coal out of the earth that John was now standing on. The government could revoke the zip code. They could demolish every other house on the block. They could send him letters on official letterhead explaining that his home had been declared unfit for human habitation. They could not make him believe that leaving was the same thing as surviving. In 1992, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania invoked eminent domain over Centralia. They did not seize the properties to fix them. They seized them to erase them. Every house, every church, every garden that residents had kept going through 30 years of fire and gas and government indifference, condemned, purchased at assessed value, demolished. The message from the state was simple. This place no longer exists, and therefore neither do your problems, and therefore neither does our responsibility. They revoked the zip code, 17927, gone from the postal system, gone from federal databases, gone from the kind of administrative infrastructure that tells the modern world a place is real. No zip code means no mail delivery. No mail delivery means no ability to register a vehicle, receive government benefits, or exist in any of the ways that require the government to acknowledge you exist. They declared the land too dangerous to inhabit. They continued sending property tax bills. Read that again. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania told the remaining residents of Centralia that their homes were legally uninhabitable, and then, every year, mailed them a bill for the privilege of owning property in a place the state had officially declared did not exist. When residents pointed out the contradiction, they were told the two issues were handled by separate departments. This is the part of the story where you understand that the fire was never really the enemy. 7 residents refused the buyout. Not because they couldn't do the math, not because they didn't understand what was under their feet. They refused because they had watched the government's entire handling of Centralia, from the 1962 decision not to spend $8,000, through 19 years of monitoring, through the Todd Dombosky hole that nearly killed a child on Valentine's Day, through the clipboards and the studies and the grave expressions, and the conclusion that the situation had evolved beyond remediation, and they had reached a simple verdict. The government did not get to decide when Centralia ended. The state took them to court. The legal battle lasted years. In 1992, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled that the remaining residents could stay for the duration of their lifetimes, but that upon their deaths, their properties would revert to the state. No inheritance, no passing it on. The line ends with them. John Lokitis accepted this. He understood exactly what it meant. He was the last chapter of a story that the government had decided would not have a sequel. He stayed anyway. On cold mornings, he could see the steam rising from the cracks in his driveway before he opened the front door. In certain spots in his yard, the ground temperature ran 20 degrees warmer than the air. His basement registered carbon monoxide levels that would have triggered evacuation orders in any other American city. He kept a CO detector on every floor. He checked them every morning the way other people check the weather. This was his home. If you drive to Centralia today, here is what you will find. A grid of empty streets going nowhere. Street signs still standing at intersections with no buildings on any corner. Concrete steps leading up to foundations where houses used to be. The steps perfectly intact, going nowhere. And Route 61, graffiti highway. A stretch of road so warped and cracked by decades of underground heat that it looks less like a road and more like something geological, something that was never meant to be driven on. The asphalt buckles and splits and rises in places, and from the cracks, if the morning is cold enough, you can still see the steam. The smell hits you before the visuals do. Sulfur and something underneath it. Something older and chemical and wrong. The specific smell of Earth that is not behaving the way Earth is supposed to behave. There are no signs explaining what happened here. No historical markers. No government acknowledgement that this town existed for 150 years. That 2,000 people built their lives here. That a child nearly fell into the earth on Valentine's Day. That 7 people looked at the state of Pennsylvania and said no. Just the streets, just the steam, just the sound of the wind moving through a grid of roads that used to be a town. The geologists have done the math. 25 million tons of anthracite coal. Current burn rate. Estimated remaining fuel. The fire under Centralia will still be burning in the year 2262. Your great-grandchildren will be old. Their grandchildren will be middle-aged. 8 generations of Americans will be born, live their entire lives, and die. And the fire that started on a Tuesday morning in May 1962, because 5 volunteers didn't check the bottom of a pit, will still be burning underneath what used to be a town. The man who signed the memo in 1962, the one that said $8,000 was too much to spend, retired comfortably, collected his pension, died in his own bed in a house with a zip code. He never publicly acknowledged what that decision had cost. The fire didn't care either way. So here is the question this story leaves you with, and I want you to think about it seriously, not just scroll past. You wake up tomorrow. You feel the heat coming through your floorboards. You smell something wrong in the air that you've been smelling for so long you stopped asking what it was. The government sends you a letter telling you your home doesn't exist, and then 3 weeks later sends you a tax bill for the home that doesn't exist. Do you take the buyout and leave the only place you've ever known? Or do you become John Lakaitis, standing on a warm porch on a Tuesday morning, watching the bulldozers work, going back inside to make breakfast on floors that haven't been cold in 15 years? There is no right answer, but I've noticed that the people who say they'd leave have usually never had to. Drop your answer in the comments, and if you know someone who thinks they're living somewhere completely safe, somewhere nothing like this could ever happen, send them this video. Because somewhere in America right now, there is a memo sitting in a government office. It has a number on it, and someone is deciding whether that number is worth it. They've made this decision before.